All across Wisconsin, helpers selflessly dedicate their lives to the care of others, whether in an informal role taking care of a loved one or as a professional providing care for another can be very rewarding. Still, it requires an endless amount of energy, empathy, and patience. All this can be very stressful, and we know that stress can negatively affect your health in many different ways. Let's start today with a quick quiz from the recent studies done on caregiver stress. What percentage of caregivers, one type of helper, state that their role has caused their physical health to decline? What percentage of caregivers reported chronic conditions, including heart attacks, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and arthritis? How much higher is the level of stress hormones in caregivers? What percentage of caregivers report not seeing a doctor as often as they should? So, any surprises there? You can see by these stats that the demands of being a caregiver can dramatically affect your health. These statistics also help us connect the dots for other helping roles you may identify with. So that's why we're here today, to help the helpers by raising awareness about the challenges that formal and informal caregivers often face. And there are a lot of them. If we can help you recognize the symptoms and risks associated with conditions like stress and burnout, we can help you learn how to manage stress in healthy ways and give you the confidence to ask for help when you need it. With information like this, you and thousands of other Wisconsin helpers can build your resiliency. And that's our goal, because being resilient means you can better cope with and bounce back from challenging experiences. Now, what I want to make very clear today is that if the stress of caring for another starts to build up, it's okay to ask for help. Reach out to a loved one, friend, coworker, or a professional. Everyone at some point in their life needs a little help, and the healthiest thing you can do for yourself is to ask for it. Today we'll be covering some tough topics, such as adverse childhood experiences and examples of toxic stress and trauma. This can be an uncomfortable experience for some. Please take the time and space that you need when watching this training. If you need help immediately, connect with someone who cares right now by calling or texting 988 or chat at 988lifeline.org. Seeking help can give you the care and support you need to build strength and resilience. That's what's going to help us bring these numbers down. Today you'll learn about a broad range of topics that can help caregivers protect themselves and others. Some of these things you might already know. Others may be new to you, but all are very important. In the end, we all hope you'll see the importance of building a support system around you. Understand how ACEs, toxic stress, and trauma are related, and how they can affect the body and brain, and why being trauma-informed matters. We also hope to help raise awareness and action for workplaces and communities, so we can all prioritize better mental and physical health.
Before we can prevent or treat the mental and physical health challenges that caregivers and helpers often experience, we have to understand the root causes of trauma and toxic stress. Our health does not begin and end at the doctor's office. It's tied to every part of our lives, our experiences and environments, our family history, as well as the barriers that certain cultural, racial, ethnic, and other marginalized communities face. Each of these factors plays a part in our health and in our ability to bounce back when things get tough. One powerful influence? ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. Let's take a closer look at how people's experiences before the age of 18 can impact their lifelong health.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems, and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
Here are 10 ACEs evaluated within the original CDC ACEs study. Throughout childhood, a person may experience physical, emotional, and/or sexual abuse, physical and/or emotional neglect, having a parent, caregiver, or adult in the home that experiences mental illness, domestic violence, substance use, is incarcerated, and/or has parents that are separated. Keep in mind that this is by no means an exhaustive list, but rather the 10 factors assessed in the original study. Despite the limitations of this list and the participants studied, the findings gathered over time serve as a foundation for explaining a public health crisis that demands a public health response. Childhood experiences like bullying, poverty, racism, sexism, and discrimination also have long-term effects. We will keep these other environmental sources of trauma in mind throughout this training. But let's take a look at how the original 10 ACEs impact Wisconsin. What you'll see is that ACEs are way more common than you think. Now, what's really important to understand here is that the ACEs survey is not a diagnostic tool. An ACE score is merely a tally of the total number of traumas or abuse that an individual may have experienced before the age of 18. The results are not your destiny. They simply provide you with information, and information is power. According to the Wisconsin Behavioral Risk Factor Survey, data from 2017 to 2020 shows that 60% of Wisconsin adults say that they experienced at least one ACE before the age of 18. And at least 15% report an ACE score of 4 or more. Now, that can be a problem for future generations in Wisconsin. Why? Because ACEs are often both a cause and a consequence of trauma. Children who grow up living with a parent with substance use disorder, for example, are more likely to also develop one themselves. It's a cycle of adversity, of inherited trauma that can affect families for generations. Therefore, the effects of ACEs last beyond childhood and lead to increased risk for poor social outcomes like unemployment, mental health conditions such as depression, and health risk behaviors like harmful substance use or sexual risk behaviors. The accumulation of ACEs also heightens our risk for chronic health diseases like heart disease, asthma, and cancer. There are also environmental factors like poor working conditions, limited access to healthcare, isolation, or institutional racism that elevate our risk for negative health outcomes. These influential conditions in which we are born, grow, live, and work, and learn are called social determinants of health, and they play a vital role in our health and our well-being. Social determinants of health can be grouped into 5 key areas. First is economic stability. This includes access to, or our lack of access to, employment opportunities or living wages, as well as food security, safe and stable housing, and overall financial security. Education consists of the presence or absence of quality early childhood education, enrollment in higher education, and good high school graduation rates. The third social determinant of health is social and community context. This includes the presence of, or lack of presence of, civic participation and a supportive community, as well as discrimination and segregation, and proportionate incarceration rates. Health and healthcare include our access to, or lack of access to, community-based primary and emergency healthcare services, and overall health literacy. Finally, neighborhood and built environment. It consists of the presence of or absence of nearby sources of healthy food, public transportation, crime prevention, affordable and safe housing, good schools, and so much more. Now, the absence of vital resources and secure environments is a powerful risk factor that is often linked to our health inequities in Wisconsin and throughout the United States. A population's social determinants of health can show us why some communities experience disproportionately poorer health outcomes than others. Because when vital resources and secure environments are accessible, they become protective factors. These reduce the effects of toxic stress and help prevent trauma and negative health outcomes before they happen. Other important protective factors include supportive relationships and social connections, opportunities to be involved in the community, healthy coping strategies, having a sense of purpose, experiencing positive relationships with caring adults, safe environments in schools, and stable finances, and the willingness to seek help. Lastly, developing our problem-solving skills. When we work to strengthen the protective factors in our lives and the lives of those that we care about, we build resilience and gain the skills to break this cycle of adversity. The same is true for communities. That's why Resilient Wisconsin works with community partners to invest in upstream prevention programs that address the root causes of trauma, like adverse childhood experiences and the other risk factors. Because while our environments and experiences can influence our health, they do not determine a person's destiny. Everybody deserves the opportunity for better health. Understanding the factors that impact your health and the health of those that you care for is a powerful tool for living a healthier, more resilient life.
Now that we know ACEs and other underlying causes of toxic stress, it's important to know how the body and brain respond to all forms of stress.
There are 3 different kinds of stress that we can encounter. There's positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. And our bodies respond to each one differently. Positive stress is typically associated with events such as meeting new people or starting a new job. When a child is learning to ride a bike, their body reacts with a small increase in heart rate and hormone levels. Stressful experiences like these are normal and essential parts of healthy development and can happen in the context of stable and supportive relationships. Tolerable stress results from more severe, longer-lasting difficulties like the loss of a loved one, a natural disaster, or a frightening injury. This kind of stress activates the body's alert systems to a greater degree. It generally occurs in a limited time frame, which gives the brain an opportunity to recover from the potentially damaging effects. All types of helpers frequently encounter tolerable stress on the job. And remember, tolerable stress is typically manageable with supportive relationships, effective systems, and connections. The third and most damaging type of stress is toxic stress. Toxic stress is the result of experiencing strong, frequent, and/or prolonged adversity like physical or emotional abuse, chronic neglect, substance abuse, mental illness, exposure to violence, oppression, discrimination, or economic hardship. And there may be a lack of systems, healthy adults, or caregivers to assist the child in returning to a calmer state. Now, for helpers, the threat of toxic stress and trauma is very real. Too often, they sacrifice their own physical and emotional needs to prioritize the well-being of others. Those in helping roles are at higher risk for experiencing burnout, compassion fatigue, and secondary or vicarious trauma. Burnout is a physical and/or mental exhaustion that may result from the inability to cope with the amount of the content of the work. Overwhelming caseloads and paperwork can be a culprit. Compassion fatigue is another form of burnout, and when the helper may begin to feel numb or lose the ability to be empathetic due to the repetitive witnessing or feeling of the pain of others. Then there is vicarious and secondary trauma, which we'll talk about later. In summary, it goes beyond burnout and compassion fatigue when the helper begins to internalize another person's trauma as their own. Signs and symptoms of these experiences by helpers include anxiety, depression, and irritability, feeling tired and run down, difficulty sleeping or relaxing, new or worsening health problems and falling ill frequently, trouble concentrating, feeling increasingly resentful or impatient, increased drinking, smoking, or eating, neglecting your own needs and responsibilities, becoming helpless and hopeless. So why is it important to recognize toxic stress? Because toxic stress results in trauma. Trauma is the emotional, psychological, and physiological residue left over from experiences that resulted in high levels of stress. Now, trauma touches all of us. Chances are you, someone you care about, or someone you care for has experienced trauma. It can happen regardless of how old we are, our cultural background, our gender, our class, ethnicity, or whatever. And trauma can be a life-shaping event. The extreme stress of trauma can significantly threaten our physical and emotional well-being and sense of safety. Trauma is subjective, meaning that a situation that you experience as traumatic may not be to someone else. Trauma often results in feelings of vulnerability, helplessness, and fear. Many traumatized people live their whole life feeling fearful. Trauma interferes with relationships and the ability to connect with others. So many people with a trauma story often become very detached from relationships, or worse yet, find themselves in very chaotic and violent relationships. Trauma also affects the fundamental beliefs people have about themselves and others. And lastly, trauma disrupts the nervous system. It truly lives in the body. So you can see how trauma can impact nearly all aspects of our health. It's a serious issue and a subject that can be difficult to talk about. But I want you to know that talking about trauma is okay. The more we know about its effects and how our body and brain respond to trauma, the more we can become aware of what's going on when we're faced with challenging times and learn how to cope with and manage our stress in a healthy way. And that's a good thing, right? Now, let's take a look at the 6 types of trauma. Understanding the type of trauma a person experiences can help us determine the kind of resources and support they need. It may also affect how the person recovers and manages their stress over time. First is acute trauma. Acute trauma is usually a single event. Acutely traumatic events are typically brief and may have a definite beginning, middle, and end, but the ramifications can go on for years and years, especially if not treated. Examples of an acute trauma could be an accident or injury that occurs at any age, or a one-time incident that caused great distress. Unlike acute trauma, complex trauma can compound over time through repeated events or an array of different events that add up. While children are more at risk of experiencing complex trauma, many adults who are preyed upon or in a powerless position are at risk as well. These experiences are often highly invasive and interpersonal, extremely stigmatizing, and can cause lingering feelings of powerlessness and shame. Examples of complex trauma are any type of abuse or neglect. Historical trauma is the amassed emotional, psychological, and physical wounding over a lifespan or across generations. These experiences don't just impact individuals. They are felt by collective groups and communities that have a long history of being oppressed. Examples of historical trauma include American chattel slavery, the violent colonization of indigenous peoples, and the Holocaust. Keep in mind, even if a person wasn't alive or present during the trauma, they can still experience the effects psychologically, physiologically, emotionally, and mentally. People can also experience historical trauma through the remains of certain events or time periods. Take systematic racism, for example. This has emerged over a long period of time and is perpetuated by a system of power that still has a very real impact over people today. The 4th type of trauma is sanctuary trauma, which happens in places where we should feel safe. Places like our home, medical and mental health service centers, substance use recovery environments, out-of-home care, schools, or places of worship. Once a person's sense of safety has been violated in these places, trusting can become more difficult. After all, the people that were supposed to keep you safe simply didn't. There's also secondary trauma and vicarious trauma. These types of trauma result from the experiences of learning about or being exposed to another person's trauma. As constant witnesses to other people's pain in our professional or personal lives, helpers are more likely to experience vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. Finally, there's collective trauma. Collective trauma is multi-layered and negatively impacts entire societies or groups of people. One recent example is the COVID-19 pandemic, which affected people of widely different backgrounds and experiences across our globe. Now, there are 2 components to collective trauma that are very important. One is the feeling that you can't escape the situation. Powerlessness is attached to this trauma because we don't know how it will end. The other piece is that we're unable to make sense of it, and this is true for all forms of trauma. What's also true about trauma and toxic stress is that they cause changes in the brain. They affect the pleasure and reward center of the brain that's connected to substance dependence. Trauma changes the prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive function, a critical area for learning. And on PET scans, we can see changes in the brain's fear response center too. In short, what does this mean? The high-risk behaviors exhibited by people who are exposed to extreme adversity are rooted in real, physical changes in their brain and nervous system. Toxic stress and trauma actually rewire the brain to look for danger everywhere. Now, because toxic stress activates the brain fight, flight, or freeze response, a constant flood of adrenaline or other stress hormones, people who experience trauma are more likely to live with chronic health conditions like high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, as well as mental health issues like depression and anxiety. Hopefully, you can now see why understanding toxic stress and trauma is so important. Because it's not just about the emotional impacts these can have on our lives. Toxic stress and trauma have the power to affect how we think, how we feel and behave, and the way our bodies grow, work, and heal. That's a big deal, right? So learning to recognize and manage stress in all its forms is a vital skill that can help all helpers prevent burnout and show them how to take better care of themselves, and in turn, those they care for.
The trauma we experience in life usually occurs in our relationships, or because we lack them. Maybe that's why trauma care and recovery happen in relationships too. We need each other to heal from our wounds. We must learn or relearn how to feel safe, secure, connected, confident, and empowered. But we can only do that when we are around others who are safe and supportive. We can only do that if we feel seen, heard, valued, and validated through our interpersonal experiences. As a helper, you can provide that support by bringing a trauma-informed perspective to the care you provide and your interactions with all the people in your life. It starts with empathy, or the ability to understand the feelings of someone else. Take a moment to think about this quote. Could a greater miracle take place than for us to look through each other's eyes for an instant? Now, I love this quote because it speaks directly about the power of empathy, the value at the heart of trauma-informed care. As helpers, we all want to help people live healthier lives. So how is trauma-informed care different from more traditional treatment models? Trauma-informed care acknowledges the pervasiveness of trauma and its effects on a person's physical and mental health, as well as their behaviors, relationships, and their response to care and support services. It also aims to reduce the stigma that often surrounds mental and behavioral health. To put it another way, while traditional treatment models ask, "What's wrong with you?" trauma-informed care asks people, "What has happened to you?" Instead of treating people and their symptoms and behaviors like problems to be solved with policies, rules, directives, or incentives, a trauma-informed approach seeks to understand an individual's symptoms and their underlying causes. It recognizes behaviors as adaptive functions and emphasizes self-care and healthy, supportive relationships as essential tools along the path to recovery. So why is trauma-informed care quickly spreading beyond the mental health field? Why is it becoming so popular across all levels of healthcare? First of all, more and more people living with trauma history are sharing their stories. And more importantly, they're talking about how they've been able to recover. As we shared before, trauma is everywhere and affects so many people from all walks of life. Today, science has successfully unpacked what trauma is and how it lives in the body and affects our physical health. Because of all this science-backed information about trauma, more and more effective services have been developed to deal with toxic stress and trauma. Through empathic, compassionate, and safe support, trauma-informed care restores hope into the lives of those living with trauma. Every helper who implements a trauma-informed approach takes 4 important steps. We call them the 4 R's of trauma-informed care. First, realize the widespread impact of trauma and understand potential paths to recovery. This means helpers understand that trauma affects children, adolescents, and adults, and that there are opportunities for healing. Trauma-informed helpers appreciate that behaviors often labeled problematic began as an understandable way to cope with life's difficulties, especially for those who face immense barriers to resources, opportunities, and support. Next, recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma. This means caregivers look for and identify signs of trauma in those under their care. Third, respond by integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices. This means helpers make an effort to consider trauma when creating and planning care programs and settings. Lastly, seek to actively resist re-traumatization. Re-traumatization is any situation, attitude, interaction, or environmental situation that replicates the events or dynamics of the original trauma and activates overwhelming feelings. Those dynamics can be obvious or they can be very subtle. It's usually unintentional, but it's always hurtful. That's why it's crucial for helpers to take specific actions to avoid activating further stress or trauma to a person in their care who has experienced trauma. Here are a few examples of possible activating experiences. As you can see, trauma-informed care is about creating safety for all, the helper and the helped. It's designed to create an atmosphere of trust and develop compassionate collaboration based on each participant's strengths. There are 6 principles that can help you create a calm, grounded, and secure environment for care. Let's unpack each one so you can see what helping others can look, sound, and feel like in practice. Feel free to pause as we cover the 6 principles and reflect individually or within a group of other helpers to identify examples or new ways that each principle can be put into practice. The first principle is safety. This is creating environments where people feel physically and emotionally safe. The second is collaboration and shared relationship. This is about creating dignity and equality in the helping relationship by sharing power and decision-making so everyone has a role to play. Remember, people who live with trauma often feel powerless in their life. Next is trustworthiness and transparency. This means building and maintaining trust with the person under your care by being clear in action and about choices. Then we have empowerment and choice. It's about recognizing, validating, and building on the strengths that the person under your care has to offer and working to facilitate their recovery rather than controlling it. Trauma-informed care strives to maximize choices for people and give them control over the healing process. Next is peer support. We need to encourage trust and collaboration by sharing stories and lived experiences that promote recovery and healing. Of course, it is essential to acknowledge a person's experiences without defining them by their trauma. Labeling them as victims or survivors can keep them stuck in their story. They are not their diagnosis. When we label, we judge, and when we judge, we lose the ability to connect with the person under our care. The 6th principle is cultural, historical, and gender issues. Understanding each person in the context of their life experiences and cultural background leads to better care. We must recognize historical trauma and the healing power of cultural connections, including racial, ethnic, and cultural needs. We must be aware of the systemic oppression that contributes to cultural, historical, and gender issues, and we must unlearn what has been taught for generations. We can then, for example, focus on destigmatizing cultural stereotypes and biases based on gender identity and sexual orientation by offering a gender-responsive services. Remember, becoming culturally responsive takes time. Be curious, ask questions, and learn as you go. It's true that providing trauma-informed care takes time and effort, but it's an essential approach for helpers and the people we serve. Dan Griffin, an internationally recognized author and thought leader, says, "We are a traumatized field working with traumatized clients, and we're sending them into a traumatized recovery community." Think about that. Every part of our community needs compassionate support and the tools to prevent and reduce toxic stress and trauma. Resilient Wisconsin supports the evidence-based power of upstream prevention as a tool to help prevent trauma before it starts. Why call it upstream prevention? Because trauma can be a lot like a river. It can sweep us away toward negative outcomes like substance use and chronic disease, and a person's ability to sink or swim can depend on the experiences, environments, and support around them. Offering treatment and prevention options early and at every stage can help. Imagine it like this. You're out walking along your favorite river when you notice people struggling in the water. You extend a hand and help person after person to shore. They're weak and cold, and some are clearly ill. Before long, more people start floating by. It's a struggle to help as many people as possible, and you're wondering what else can be done to help them. Intervening here is called tertiary prevention. It's important to help people in urgent need. When individuals face a crisis, tertiary prevention services offer vital treatment options that help individuals cope and recover. These interventions are essential for dealing with the consequences of trauma. So now back on the river, the rush of people isn't stopping. Upstream, there are people clinging to tree branches and rocks in the water. They haven't been swept away by the current yet, but they still need help. Now you start throwing life preservers to those in the water. You wonder where all these people are coming from. Intervening here is called secondary prevention. Giving people the tools and support for improving their health is key. Secondary prevention programs provide a critical response to behavioral health challenges. Such midstream interventions can help individuals avoid further harm. Now, as you're throwing life jackets to as many people as you can, you hear a distant noise. Upstream, someone falls through a hole in an old bridge and splashes into the river below. That's it, right? That's where all these people are coming from. And if someone doesn't post warning signs or repair the bridge, more people will fall in. So, you head upstream with your toolbox knowing that fixing this bridge will help keep people safe today and for years to come. This is the earliest point of intervention called primary prevention. Helping people build resilience can prevent harm before it occurs. That's why primary prevention takes place upstream. By addressing the root causes of public health challenges, these interventions have the power to strengthen and protect communities as well as individuals. Now, I really want you to think about the impact that a trauma-informed care approach can have on our lives and communities. This is a valuable tool that can impact a person's entire health journey. At every stage, trauma-informed care can provide empathy, support, and the tools people need to live happier, healthier lives. And it's empowering. Not only can it strengthen you as a caregiver, but it can help make all Wisconsin communities more compassionate, healthy, and resilient. And that's precisely what we're after.
As helpers, we are often exposed to the pain and trauma of others. You experience the same collective traumas that affect our local and global communities, from mass shootings to pandemics. And like so many in Wisconsin, you may carry your own traumatic experiences. Many helpers consider caring for neighbors and loved ones a calling, but that calling can take a toll on a person's health and well-being. When helpers sacrifice their own physical and emotional needs, it can result in stress or burnout. But with the right knowledge, tools, and support, you can follow your calling and live a healthy, balanced life. I can't emphasize this enough. You can learn the skills that will help you cope, recover, and heal from the challenges, stress, and trauma many helpers face. That's why we're here today, to help you build resilience. Resilience is our ability to cope with and bounce back from adversity. It helps us build the strength needed to prepare for and buffer the effects of toxic stress and trauma. Resilience is a skill that we can all build, both as individuals and communities. Think of it like a muscle that you can continually grow and strengthen to protect yourself from and soften the impact of trauma. Now, there are many different types of resilience you can build to help you overcome challenges. Physical resilience helps our bodies overcome physical health challenges. It helps us bounce back from illness or injury and can help us manage or avoid chronic conditions. Mental resilience helps us work through tough times by developing our adaptability and problem-solving skills. Emotional resilience helps us respond in healthy ways to challenges that bring about feelings or emotions like anger, fear, weakness, or sadness. Social resilience gives us the ability to connect with others in our community, maintain healthy relationships, and both offer and accept support in challenging times. Statewide resilience helps us foster collaboration across programs and communities that address the interconnected causes and consequences of trauma and toxic stress. Now, becoming resilient doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to develop, but building resilience as an individual is something you can start today. You don't have to be in crisis mode or going through a traumatic experience. It's all about being ready when hard times come your way. Let's look at 7 strategies you can use right now to help you become more resilient. Prioritize good, healthy relationships. Surround yourself with a supportive network of people who care about you and spend quality time with them. A simple phone call or connecting virtually online helps. Take care of your body. It's easier to maintain your mental and emotional health when you feel good. Make an effort to eat well, get enough sleep, and exercise. Practice mindfulness through walking, meditation, or yoga. Avoid harmful behaviors. Look for healthy ways to deal with difficult emotions. Trying to escape these feelings through substance use will only create more stress. Be proactive and take charge. You can't always control your circumstances, but you can control your response. Break problems into manageable tasks and move forward. Check in with your feelings. When stressful events occur, it's essential to take a step back and reflect before you react. It helps to understand where your emotions are coming from before you share them. Learn from the past. Recognize who or what was helpful or unhelpful the last time you were in a stressful situation. Remembering past challenges can help you overcome new ones. Ask for help when you need it. Reaching out to your family or friends, a healthcare professional, or a community resource isn't always easy, but knowing how to accept help is a sign of strength. Remember, you are never alone. We all need help at certain points in our lives, even the helpers. Asking for help is a true mark of resilience, not a sign of weakness. Caring for yourself is one of the most important things you can do as a caregiver. It's essential to maintain your own health and well-being. Because when you feel strong, you can take better care of the people who rely on you. The same is true for communities. The stronger we are as a workplace or a hometown, as a people, and as the state of Wisconsin, the more capable we'll be of caring for each other and our most vulnerable. If you read or watch the news, it may feel like our communities are facing more challenges than ever. If collective trauma and the shared experience of crisis are becoming more common, we need to think bigger, broader, and system-wide. Why? We have a responsibility to one another to help our communities bounce back from adversity. What's important to understand is that building resilient communities goes beyond the individual level. Again, we must think bigger and create systems-level changes to have the greatest impact. We can do this through creating safer neighborhoods, fair policing, improving access to affordable housing and healthcare, as well as the other examples you see here. Ensuring all our neighbors have a chance to live their healthiest lives is worth it, because when our whole community is strong, we're all stronger too. To create a more resilient Wisconsin, we must reach across disciplines, community programs, focus areas, and agencies statewide. It means breaking down silos and working collaboratively to address the influences of health outside of our control. And as individuals and people who can do their part to shape the systems of care in our state, it means asking ourselves important questions, like, how can we reduce risk factors and improve protective factors? Often, reducing our level of risk is outside of individual level control, but we can actively work to build up protective factors that buffer the impacts of risk. How can we address the social determinants of health and improve the conditions in which many Wisconsinites live, work, and grow? New policy and prevention efforts designed to improve people's social, economic, and environmental conditions can create lasting, large-scale change for Wisconsin's people and communities. How can we improve health equity? In Wisconsin, just like the rest of the world, health disparities exist across racial and ethnic divides and in communities defined by gender, sexual orientation, age, disability, socioeconomic status, and geographic location. Promoting trauma-informed practices that address systemic issues, reduce stigma, and extend access to quality care can help provide everyone with equitable opportunities for healthier lives. Finally, how can we prioritize upstream prevention? Investing in prevention early through better legislation, education, and statewide programs, and at every stage, can help communities reduce and prevent the devastating effects of trauma. Now, there is always room for increased knowledge and new ideas, so if we all work together, we can achieve a healthier, more resilient Wisconsin. Being resilient is a complex and weighty task for individuals that operate within a larger context of communities, systems, and trauma. Therefore, we must strive to build trauma-informed organizations and institutions championed by leaders that engage community members and improve social determinants of health. This will ultimately create environments where individuals are equipped with tools and resources to embody resilience.
As a part of the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, our mission at Resilient Wisconsin is to give everyone in our state the opportunity to live their best lives. We strive to provide you with the tools and resources you need to be your most resilient self, especially the helpers across Wisconsin who so selflessly dedicate their lives to the care of others. Remember, it's okay to ask for help. A vast network of community programs and peer support resources is ready to offer assistance whenever you need it. You're not alone.